Hi folks, Marty here. Today we're going to take a look at this painting that I did about 20 years ago. It was a wee class demonstration. And what I'm going to teach you is how to trace effectively. So that basically means if you're not a great drawer or you have difficulty with drawing, it's not the end of the world. There's just lots of ways around it, and I'm just going to show you how I trace. When I am tracing, that is. If it's something very specific and very detailed, and the proportions and the ratio have to be exactly right, this is something you can do. Okay, so first of all, get your picture that you're going to trace, put it on your board, and what I'm going to do is put a wee bit of masking tape on here, just to hold it in place for me. Keep it from moving around when I put the tracing paper on it. Okay, and a wee bit at the bottom. Now, tracing paper, you can use artist professional tracing paper, or you can use good old grease proof paper from the kitchen. Either does the job. So I have a bit cut here and all, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to also use a bit of masking tape to hold this in place, because the last thing you want to do is have that move around on you. So keep it in all four corners, just mask down like that. Okay, now when I'm doing this, I'm using two things. First of all, I'm using a pen, okay, and what you want to do here is you want to maybe do a B on the top of your paper, okay? That's to show you that when after you trace this and you turn it around the other way, you want to know which is the side that you've actually used your pen on, okay? So a lot of people would use pencil at this stage, but I'm not going to use pencil, and I'll explain why in a wee minute. Because what we want to do is we want something that's not going to rub out and something that's going to be very clear. So basically what you do is you get your pen, and then you just sketch over the top of that picture. And you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, because when you're touching up later on, you can touch it up with the pencil anyway, and just have it exactly the way you want it. So I'm just kind of just doing this roughly, okay? When I'm doing roofs of houses, I like to do a wee bit of a curve in them, make them look nice and old and run down looking. Don't want to look like a brand new architectural building or drawing. Okay, so just down the side of that, and then just that doorway. So you don't have to do loads of detail. It's just to give you an idea of where things in your picture are positioned, okay? And then just do a little bit along that bottom there, okay? And then these are bits of timber and lumber and wood and all sorts of wee things just sitting against that wall there. Maybe turn that into an old wagon wheel, alright? And then I'm going to run this out to the edge here. Okay, so that's nearly us there. And then I'm just going to do this window here as well. Okay, nearly there. Maybe do a couple of bushes and so on, just okay, maybe do a wee bit of an indication of where that shadow's going, and then do this little grass bank here. Just give me a bit of an idea where things are, and then the trees, just a very light impression of the outline there. Keep it very simple. You don't want this to be too rigid, because when you go over it with the pencil anyway, it will change a little. Okay, and then I'll have a bit of a, where the light would shine through here, and then maybe a few stepping stones that are embedded into that lawn there. Okay, and then you could do a few of your flowers, little daisies, marigolds, basically whatever you like, just to give a wee bit of interest in that foreground. Okay, this is kind of based on the previous lesson that we covered on flowers and so on. Okay, I'm not going to get into the whole drawing each blade of grass here. Just want to keep the whole thing simple. And then maybe put a wee bit of shadow in here. And a little bit over here. I think that's about everything that I want to cover there. Obviously birds and so on, you can pop them on later. Alright, so that is stage 1 completed. Okay, so what I would do here is that pen will still be wet, so I would take a hairdryer and give that a quick drying. Just take a bit of tissue, because you don't want that pen going on to your watercolor painting underneath. Okay, so just make sure there's no wet bits of pen. So once you've that done, take your masking tape off, and don't forget you can use this masking tape again, so just take it off and pop it to the side. And then what we can do now is take our source picture off, and just have it somewhere handy, so that when you're painting you can use it as a reference. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to get our piece of watercolor paper, and just make sure you check that it's the right way round. There is 2 different sides to most watercolor paper, and you see the way it has a sort of like a manufactured pattern in that. That would be normally the back of it, whereas this bit here, it's a bit more kind of random looking. So that's what you're after. So now what you do is I'm just putting these little bits of tape to the side just for a minute. I will use those again. But what I want you to do now is get your masking tape, and I want you to mask this sheet of watercolor to the board. Okay, so that's that masked to the board. What we need to do now is, so if you remember, this was the side that had the pen on it. So what we want to do here is we want to turn it over the other side now. And if you like, you could take your pen and you could even put an A on that. Okay, so this is the side that we're going to have the pencil on, and we're going to use a soft lead. But first, let's just tie this down a wee second, just to keep that moving around on us. Okay, so here what we're going to do now is we're going to get a soft leaded pencil. I would say anything from a 2B, 3B, 4B, 5B even would do the job. And the reason being because the lead is soft, so when we put this lid onto the tracing paper, then what we're going to do is we're going to turn it back to the B side, and then we're going to use a spoon to create the impression, or press it onto the pen side, so as we can push the pencil onto your watercolor paper. Okay, so just nice and strong. You can lean pretty heavily on that because you want plenty of the graphite. Don't forget to keep your pencil sharp as well. Even sometimes you'd be better even using a colored pen. So then you could see the difference between your pencil and the pen that's underneath. Now, this is just an aid to help you establish the rough outline. And hopefully you should be able to get several transfers out of this. It's always checking that you're covering all the lines that you're meant to, but don't worry if you don't, and don't worry if you've forgotten to do bits and bobs. And then your wee stepping stones. This is a great way if you're doing a lot of different versions or iterations of the one drawing, which we are going to do. We're going to do a more sunnier looking scene with warmer tones in it. I'm just putting in little impressions here. So I think I have most of what I need there. Okay, so simple as that. Now what I just have to do is just make sure I've got those in. What you can do now is take the tape off the side of that. Okay. And see, you can see the little bits of pen there. It just wasn't dried just exactly. That's why you need to spend a wee bit more time than what I did. Okay, so I'm going to place that over my watercolor paper now. So again, you need to make sure that that is well stuck down with the tape. You don't need to tape the whole sides. You can just tape the important bits. Okay, just remember, this is our pen side now that we're on, okay? Because we're going to use something that's going to help us to get the transfer of the pencil graphite that we need. Okay, so the best thing that I have found for this, and the reason why I use this next thing, is basically it's less messier. Okay, it's basically a teaspoon. Now what some people would do is they would use another pencil and then they would scrub over the line, the pen. But the problem I found with that is it can create indents on the watercolor paper underneath. It can create these real unsightly marks. But I find that this normally does the job, okay? So it's just a case of just massaging that like this. Depending on how hard you rub, obviously it can get quite hot. So just wee circles, just massaging that round and round like that. Try and work your way down the picture so as you're getting everything in there. If you have a very detailed area, what you can do is you can use the bottom of a pencil. What I mean by that is, see this, the round bit here? If you have a very detailed bit, you could use that. Okay. So I'm not expecting this to be very dark in colour on the other side, but it's just enough to give me an indication of where things are. And it's the way to get your transfer the right orientation in terms of the right way round. You don't want it back to front on you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to peel this here off and just give it a wee check, just to make sure that it's done the job for us. That's a handy thing about just using that masking tape over and over again. Okay, so just one more, a top one, and that should be doing the job. Look at that. So it's quite light, but don't worry about that. That's all you need. Obviously, the type of pencil you use will determine how many of these transfers you can get. I've gotten pretty close to 10 in some of my classes, where we're trying to concentrate more on the painting than the pencil work. And I've been able to get quite a few transfers out of these, depending on what kind of pencil you use. Okay, so that's all I need, just to give me an indicator. So now what I can do is I can go back to my pencil again, and then this time I can just spend a wee bit more time just penciling that in. And then of course I'm using my source picture to remind me what I'm doing. Okay, so what you're doing now is you're just adding in any details that you left out. So you can do this using a magazine, or if you have a photograph and you want to basically do quite a good representation of it. Okay, just keep it all very nice and loose. And then you can add in wee details that you want. And then have the roof just arching down like that. Just think it looks so much better. I would never suggest doing those with a ruler or anything like that. And that wee window in there. And another hedge just outside that door there. And then on the back here, you've got your trees in the distance here a wee bit. Okay, and then you've got this grass bank here, just coming down there. And then up here you have your main tree. And you've got the tree trunks here. Just leave wee gaps and so on. Okay, and then the light's going to come this direction, so I want to have this bit a little bit lighter than this area. So always remember to think about where your sun's coming from. I'm going to have it coming from this direction here. And then I'm going to have a wee bit of an indication of where I want that shadow to cast. And then I'm going to have those little stepping stones. Just zigzag them. Okay, and then in the foreground, I'm just going to do a couple of little indications of where I want the flowers to be. There's a couple of ways you can do these. You can put masking fluid on them just to preserve the whites, or you can just paint them in with white gouache or white paint. Because they're so small, I'm just going to paint them in with gouache. Okay, that's basically all the information I need to start this painting. Remember, it's really the painting you're after, it's not a pencil drawing. So, and then I'm going to have a bit of shadow underneath here. And you can put a little person in here. They may be out just feeding chicks and stuff like that. And a wee dog. Just behind here. Don't forget to give them a wee shadow as well. And then indicate where you want your shadows to be here. Keep it all very loose at the minute, you know. Just let the paint do all the detailed aspect of it. Okay, I'm happy with that. So it'd be a good idea if you could do this twice. This would be the first painting we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to copy the painting that I first did, using those kind of colours. It's like a sunny day, but there's some clouds in the sky, a wee bit overcast in some parts of it. And then I'm going to show you how to do the same painting again, but with warmer colours, just to give you a bit of a contrast. And then it's also the kind of thing that if you want to do a third time, you could do a snow scene, completely transform it altogether. And I do like to paint with the seasons. And at this time of year, when we're coming into those lovely autumn colours, those coppers and golds and reds, it's always nice to do that. But just to show you how I did this painting in the first place, we're going to give that a wee go. Okay, so here we are. We're going to tackle this painting now. I'm going to give you a rough idea of the kind of brushes I'm going to use. Okay, so you've got your big brush, 16, a 12, and your rigger, and just a smaller brush for a bit more detailed, and then my wee tiny, I call this my little bird brush, because it's just has such a fine point and tip on it, and it's great for doing birds. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to tackle the sky first. I always like to work my way down the picture, starting on the sky, and then you can either decide whether you want to tackle the house next or do the trees. It's one of those ones, whatever you're feeling like at the time, really. Okay, so that's fresh water in my jars. So here we go. I'm looking at the original picture and the sky's a bit overcasty. So what you can do here is mix two colours up. You could have your yellow ochre, just for a wee bit of warmth to burn through the sky. And then I'm going to bring in one of my grey colours. Mix a wee bit of blue in with that. This is a good place to have your wee scrap bits of paper about, okay? Okay, that's a good colour. That's just what I'm after. So, a wee bit of grey. Don't forget, if you mix 3 colours together, you can get a grey out of those, okay? So, and I'm going to do this wet into wet. So I'm going to lightly wet the paper, but I don't want to bring it the whole way down over the house because I want to keep this house nice and light for my warm colours. So if you can just bring it down and paint around the house with water. So don't be over soaking this, okay? And then just bring it down to about here. Just paint around that. Don't worry about the trees. You can paint with your water just all over that there. Okay, so just touch around those bits here. Okay, that's nicely dampened the way I want it there. Working quickly now, what I want to do is I want to get my grey colour, and the sun's coming from this direction here, so I'm going to have this bit is where the clouds are coming from. Okay, a wee bit more of that. I think that'll work there. So now I'm taking the excess off and getting into my yellow ochre. And what I'm going to do is just drop that yellow ochre just in here and there. Don't worry about those trees, just go on into that area where those trees are going to be there. And this will keep you from getting hard edges. Okay, that's not too bad. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a wee bit more pigment into that and a wee bit stronger up there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let that run a wee bit, let it kind of blend a wee bit better. Okay, so that's the foundation of this sky. And because the little farmhouse is going to be those light browny colours, what we can do is we can bring that yellow ochre on down there if I want. And then because the sun's coming from this area here, this little area is where the light will just bounce on through there. Okay, I think that'll do the job. So what we'll do now is we'll just give it a quick dry. Okay, so that's that dried off. What I'm going to do now is turn my attention to those trees. Okay, so when I'm doing trees, I have my go-to colours, and I have my go-to colours that I often use. Let me just tidy this up a little. So there's a couple of things you can do here. If you have a pre-mixed green already, you can go ahead and take advantage of that and just use it. But if you don't, what you can do is grab some of your blue and then just mix a wee bit of your yellow into it. Okay, so this is going to be for the tops of the trees where the light or the sun would hit them. And then what we want to do is a stronger colour in here. So I'm just going to use that blue and maybe put a wee bit of that into it. So this is going to be where the tree is in shadow. Okay. So here we go. We're just doing the tops of the tree. So just don't forget to leave plenty of holes and gaps and stuff, you know. Start digging into my darker colour now. And then even darker again. So when it gets towards this bottom bit here, that's where you're going to have your tree trunks. So what I would do at this stage, maybe switch to a smaller brush. And what you can do is that blue, you can put a bit of brown into it, and even burnt umber would do. Back into your blue again. So my go-to colours for tree trunks and branches is ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Okay, so what you can do now is just, while that's still damp there, just do a couple of tree trunks like that and let that go right up into that green paint that you just put on. And then just let that'll just add to the shadow there. Okay, and a few wee fine branches here and there. Okay, so what we're going to do is do the tree over at the other side there, behind the house. This is a great way just to frame a building or a wee house, just to put the trees behind it like that. Even if the picture that you're doing doesn't have this kind of thing in it, I would just imagine that that's the case, that there is trees there. Bring it down to the top of that roof. Okay, so what I want to do now is want to go into your blue, pull some of that stronger colour in there, and this will be our shadow bit where the tree is in shadow down at the bottom there. Just put that across like that. And with watercolour, it's never going to be exactly the same. If you're copying something that you've seen or previously done, it will look different. Okay, so see how that just frames our building there? Alright, I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do is just quickly dry that off now with the hairdryer. Okay, so that's the trees dried off. This is one of the reasons why I don't really like drawing trees, because you're always left with these pencil marks, and then of course you can just go ahead later on and just use an eraser and just gently rub those out. But do it gently, you don't want to be damaging the paper at all. Okay, so at this stage we're working on the middle distance here. So we've got our trees, they've helped to frame the house. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn our attention to the house. So I would basically do the roof first. And to do that, I'm just going to use a combination of cobalt blue and alizarin crimson. So I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush now. So cobalt blue and alizarin crimson. Okay, and that'll give us like a purpley color. All right. So if I put a bit of ochre in that now, it'll turn it more towards a grey color. So you just got to go in and out a wee bit just to get the right combination that you need. There you go. So that cobalt blue just takes it a wee back more towards a cooler color. Okay. So, and I'm just going to drop that in here. Again, you're framing the house. And I'll do that with the front of the house. What I like to do is when I'm doing something like this, you just don't want a block colour. So what you can do is you can throw in a slightly darker colour like that, just down at the bottoms, just to give that roof a bit of variation in it, just to break it up a wee bit. Okay, and then just for the sake of time, I will dry that off again. Alright, at this point, we're just going to mix up a colour for the house using the same brush. I'm going to get some more yellow ochre, and maybe I'll bring in a wee bit of light red there. Okay, so this is the side of the house that's in sun. Okay. And again, you want to avoid something looking very blocky, so I'll take my damp brush and I'll just gently lift some of that paint off like that. So it just helps to break it up a wee bit. So this side part of the wall is going to be a lot darker because it's in shadow. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can go ahead and bring this color over here and then go over it with a translucent color, or else you can just mix up a stronger color right now and do it all in one go. So I think we'll do that. But let me just dry it off quickly, because when I start painting this, I don't want it bleeding into it. Okay, so we're onto the side wall now. So you're basically looking at the same color again, but maybe with a bit more blue in it this time. So it's still a warm color. Maybe a wee bit of that alizarin crimson there. Yeah, that's starting to look like a shadowy color to me. Okay. So then we'll just pop that on here. And again, to keep a colour from looking very samey, you might want to vary that colour a wee bit by maybe dropping a slightly different colour into it. So that's where those bits of lumber and timber and wood and so on are going to go. So I'm just going to you're really just giving the impression that there's something there. Okay. And then what I'll do now is go into that lighter colour again that we made up for the front of the house. You remember it's yellow ochre and a wee bit of light red or alizarin, and then I mean, it's still going to be on the darker side of things because this part of the house will be in shade. So what I'm going to do now, just take the paint off my brush and then just dab it, and then dab it on a tissue, take some of that excess, and then I want to just lift a wee bit of that just to give me a wee bit of variation, okay? And what I can do here is later on I can come back with some shadow for this area here. So I'm going to put a wee bit of paint down here. That's the gable wall there. And a bit in here. Okay, I'll give that a quick drying off. Okay, so at this stage we're just looking at detail. We can finish off the house, or we can start just working down into the middle area here. Maybe what we'll do is we'll finish off the house so then we can dedicate our time to just working on this area. So the thing that'll make a house stand out is how you use shadow and use your darks, okay? So if you wanted this doorway to look like the door's open, or it's an old door even, you want to go into your darker colours, okay? So I'm getting into my blues here. And because I've already mixed it with some of these warmer colours, it'll give me a nice grey colour. So I'm just going to drop that down like this. And maybe a little bit for that window there. And in the front of the house. And then this part here where these windows are, maybe leave a wee bit down the centre. Get the impression that it's a bit of wood. Okay, and the usual wee trick, just take the moisture out of your brush and then just touch it gently, just to give a wee bit of variation there. See, like that? You can do the same way here. We drop a wee bit into the bottom of that. Okay, I think we'll work with that for now. Okay, at this stage now, we're just looking at some little details bits here. I think we'll get a little bit of that turquoisey colour there. And then we'll just break that there up with a wee bit of that, wee bit of colour. Just to be different. Okay, so what I'll do later is I'll come back and I'll put in the shadow. It's the shadow that just really makes something stand out, makes it pop. But at this stage what we're going to do is we're going to start working on these grassy banks. Okay, so remember this area is shadow, so we just paint on through that and then we come back later on after that with the shadow colour. So I'm just going to clean up this little well here. and I'm just switching to either switch to a 10 or a 12 size brush, and then just get some water into your palette, and then into a cobalt blue and yellow ochre. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with that bank there. Just needs a wee bit more colour on it. I'm going to bring that on down there. And then the trick to this here is to keep it all very varied. I'm just going to paint around those little stepping stones. So I'm going to go a wee bit stronger down towards the bottom here. And I'm looking at that grass bank up there. It just needs a wee bit of something stronger. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll take that colour and I'll just put some out over here. There's little bushes and so on outside the farmhouse. So you want a nice strong colour there. Just to drop it down, just to let that bleed down into the little hillside. That's and I'm just going to take some of the colour back out of the top of that with a dry brush. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that for a second. Okay, so I'm just looking at this now and thinking, what's next? Okay, we've got this area looks like it's in shadow, which is fine. And then this dark area just looks like you're getting, when it comes down into this grass area, it just looks like an area of rough part of the lawn or the meadow, if you like. And then we could start bringing in our grass in a bit more detail. So I think we'll kind of turn our attention to that now. So, as in the previous lesson, we were going to do lots of little bits of grass up. We could do a lot of that now, and then we could come back later with the white, and we'll just touch this in with our white gouache, or whatever kind of white paint you happen to have. So you want a good strong colour for this. So going into my blues, and then a bit of yellow ochre there, and maybe a bit of burnt umber. Okay, and you want this to be quite thick and creamy. I think that'll do it there. And then it's a case of getting your rigger. And then just remember, just it's all in the technique. It's all about, you know, how to drag the hand up, you know, in this kind of motion. Okay, it's good. So what I want to do now is I want to get a wee bit darker now. So I'm going to, you can go into one of your neutral tint if you have any. A bit of stronger colour still. So I'm just doing this all very random here. And then what I'm doing now is just a wee bit of spattering, just to okay. Just be careful you don't go too crazy with that. Okay, I just think we'll dry that off now. Okay, so that's all my wild grass and so on. So what I'm going to do now is start bringing in a couple of wee flowers and so on. So what I'll do is I'll get some of my white gouache, okay? And you'll want a nice small brush for this one. Okay, so Keeping it nice and thick. Just do wee random bits here and there. So you're doing the little petals here and there. If you want to do a wee bit of spotter technique, just helps to keep it all a bit random. Okay, so that's that dried off. So what I'm going to do now is get some yellowy paint, and then I'm going to put in little dabs here and there, just for the center of those little flowers. Okay, so it's just remembering, it's just the impression, okay? And now I'm going to get some red. And the bits like that are going to look like poppies. So you don't want too much detail here, it's just to give the impression, alright? Any wee white bits up here that you had earlier on, you can just dot them in. And a few wee random bits here and there. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a bit of white gouache again, and I'm going to put a wee bit on my palette here. Okay. And then I'm going to put a wee drop of blue into that. Maybe another wee drop of blue. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring in a wee bit of detail. I'm thinking about these areas here, these little stones here. Okay, so I know in the original picture they're quite light. But what I'm going to do is make them a wee bit darker this time, I think. And just use the old tissue just to soften that up a bit. And that same kind of browny colour, I can take that and I can use it up here on the house just to give the impression that there's some brickwork. Remember, it's just the impression. You don't want to be painting every brick or it's just not going to look great. Okay, I think that's enough on that there. So what I want to do now is bring a bit of shadow into that. And my go-to shadow colour is cobalt blue and alizarin crimson with a little touch of yellow ochre. So starting with the darkest colour, or the temperature, the cooler colour, and a little bit of alizarin into it. Alizarin is very strong, so just watch out for that. And then get a bit more of that yellow ochre in there. Okay, and touch more blue. Okay, I think that's probably dark enough there. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, if there was shadow underneath here, it would be like that. And because the colours I'm using are reasonably translucent, I'll just make it look like there's shadow there. It's the shadow colour that I find that just makes things stand out and pop. I'll put a wee bit around those stepping stones as well. Okay, I think we're getting there. So now I'm going to concentrate on the little figure. It's just deciding what colour the clothes she's wearing. See, it looks like an old picture, an old scene from Ireland. I'll maybe have her wearing dark. Remember, it's just the impression. And then the wee doggy behind her. A couple of wee chickens. Okay, so I'm going to mix up a bit more of that colour there, that my shadow colour. So that's my cobalt, a wee hint of alizarin. And this time I want to keep it on the purpley kind of colour. Alright, and then that'll do for my shadows around here. Put a bit of shadow beside the bottom of that house there. Maybe drop a wee bit down here. Okay, at this stage I'm just looking for ways that I can put in a little bit of detail. So I'm just going to get my rigger. And if you have any light paint in the tube, what you can do is just add in a wee bit of some wee highlights here and there. Just wee touches, just don't overdo that again. Okay, there's nothing more I can do there without completely overdoing it. So I'm going to get my little brush now and then get a little bit of movement into this picture. Okay, so again, you're just wanting a darker color for this here. Okay, so a few wee birds. And then the only thing that's left to do now is just pop the signature on there. And then just, I'm going to remove the tape. So hopefully that'll give me a nice frame. So there you have it. That's another interpretation of that painting from earlier. It's very different, and you're never going to get two paintings in watercolor that look the same. So each time you do it, it'll be very different. So have a wee go at that. Try out the tracing method, and then if it doesn't go the way you want it, then have another go. It'll not take you too long then because you've already traced it out. So have a go at that, and until next week, just keep on painting away, and I'll see you soon.